The running never ends. Forrest Gump had always run, across fields, through cities, through life. He'd run to escape bullies, run toward adventure, and run without knowing why. It was simple, he just felt like running. But now, something had changed. The roads he once knew, the landscapes that had passed him by in a blur, had become unfamiliar, dark, and twisted. No matter how far or fast he ran, he could never seem to get away from the thing that followed him. It had started innocently enough. Forrest had gone out for one of his usual long runs, his legs moving without thinking, his mind free of worry. But this time, the air felt heavy, and the sky had taken on a deep, ominous hue. The familiar landmarks, the farmhouses, the trees, the clear blue skies, had been replaced with shadows and fog. And the more he ran, the darker it got. He tried to ignore it at first, chalking it up to his mind playing tricks on him. But the feeling of unease grew with every step. There was no one on the road, no sound but the rhythmic pounding of his feet against the pavement. The birds had gone silent, and the wind didn't stir the leaves anymore. It was as if the world around him was holding its breath. And then came the footsteps. At first, they were faint, just behind him, almost in sync with his own. But as Forrest picked up his pace, the footsteps grew louder, faster, as if something, or someone, was chasing him. He turned, his heart racing, but there was no one there. Just the endless road stretching behind him, disappearing into the mist. But the footsteps didn't stop. Forrest ran faster, his legs burning as he pushed himself harder than he ever had before. But no matter how fast he ran, the footsteps stayed with him, always just a step behind. He tried to turn off the road, to take a different path, but the road twisted back on itself, looping in endless circles. No matter which way he went, he always ended up back on the same road, with the same footsteps following him. "Run, Forrest, run," a voice whispered on the wind, faint and mocking. Forrest's heart pounded in his chest. He knew that voice. It was his own, but twisted, darker, filled with malice. He tried to outrun it, to leave it behind, but it was always there, just out of sight, just out of reach. The landscape around him began to change. The trees twisted into grotesque shapes, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The road beneath his feet cracked and crumbled, turning into jagged stones that cut into his shoes. The sky had turned a deep, blood red, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. And still, he ran. Forrest's mind began to unravel. He saw figures in the distance, shadowy shapes that flickered in and out of existence. They watched him from the side of the road, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. He recognized some of them. His mama, Jenny, Lieutenant Dan. But their faces were wrong, twisted into grotesque smiles that sent shivers down his spine. "Forrest," they whispered, their voices overlapping, a cacophony of mockery and malice. "You can't stop. You'll never stop." Forrest's legs ached, his lungs burned, but he couldn't stop. The footsteps were louder now, right behind him, echoing in his mind. He turned again, desperate to see who, or what, was chasing him, but the road behind him was empty. But the voice, the mocking, twisted version of his own, was still there. Run, Forrest, you'll never stop running. The world around him had become a nightmare. The road stretched endlessly, the figures on the side watching him with their hollow, mocking eyes. The sky had turned black, and the ground beneath his feet felt like it was crumbling away, leaving him running on nothing but air. He didn't know how long he had been running. Hours? Days? Time had lost all meaning. His body screamed for him to stop, to rest, but the footsteps never let him. They were always there, just behind him, chasing him, mocking him. The road had become his prison, a never-ending loop that he could never escape. Forrest, you'll never stop. His mind was slipping. He saw things, twisted versions of his past, memories that had been corrupted by the darkness that surrounded him. He saw himself as a child, running from bullies, but this time, there was no one chasing him. There was just the road, stretching on forever, leading nowhere. And then, in the distance, he saw it, a figure, standing in the middle of the road. It was dark, its form shifting and flickering like a mirage. Forrest slowed, his breath coming in ragged gasps, as he approached the figure. But as he got closer, he realized the terrible truth. The figure was him. It was a twisted, grotesque version of himself, its eyes hollow, its face contorted into a twisted grin. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. It only watched him, waiting. Forrest, you'll never stop. Forrest's heart raced. He wanted to run, to turn back, but there was nowhere to go. The road stretched on forever, the footsteps still echoing in his mind, the figure of himself blocking his path. In the end, Forrest realized the terrible truth. He would never stop running. The road would never end. The footsteps, the twisted figures, the mocking voices, they would always be there, chasing him, haunting him. Forrest Gump, the man who had run across the country, who had lived a life filled with adventure and love, was now trapped in an endless loop, a nightmare from which he could never escape. And the running never stopped.